Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mike LaSousa. I'm the superintendent here in Chatham. Thank you, especially if you've come from Berkeley Heights or Milburn or Summit or New Providence. We appreciate you coming over to our school district to hear our friend John Grund speak tonight about mindfulness. It's funny, last year we had a number of presentations that our student assistance counselors, who are right in front of me right now, Lisa Latarullo and Alex Emmer, had organized for our parents here in Chatham. And at the beginning of the year, they gave me the schedule of events, and mindfulness was one of them. And I had never heard of the term a year and a half ago. And then about midway through last year, I saw a 60 Minutes episode about it, and then John came to speak. And since John came to our district last year, we've had a variety, a whole menu of initiatives that we've launched around mindfulness with the goal of trying to bring our staff as well as our students to be more mindful and contemplative about themselves, about each other, and about the world around them. So we're really thrilled that John could come back and speak to a wider audience tonight. Before I hand the microphone to him, I just want to thank our student assistance counselors from all of the districts involved in this consortium. They're the ones who have driven the effort and who are so committed to helping all of our students feel welcomed and able to succeed in the school environment. So special thanks to school counselors. I hope you enjoy the presentation, and without any further ado, I'll hand it to John Grund, and you can introduce yourself and anything else you want to say, John.
Excellent, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So do me a big favor is, if you can, get everything out of your hands. And the phones, if you can spend 1 hour away from a screen, that will be your biggest test tonight. And we'll talk about the phones a little bit. Some of you might jones a little bit, might be jonesing for the screen, but we'll work on that a little bit. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to sit upright with your spine as straight as possible without being rigid. If you take the image of sitting with dignity, your hands can go wherever you want. You can put them in your lap. You can hold them, whatever you want to do. You don't need to do this or anything like that. And then I'm going to ask you, if you feel comfortable with this, if you can close your eyes or at least stare in front of you. Again, you don't want to be rigid. And just stare lightly in front of you. You can lift your shoulders up to your ears, get a nice little stretch, and let them down. And then just begin to relax into this room. Begin to let go of the day. All the stress and craziness that you probably dealt with today, and all the things that you need to do when you get home and get ready for work tomorrow or work. Just let it go. For the next hour, if you can be with me as much as possible. And the first thing I'm going to invite you to do is to begin breathing in a certain way. And I'm going to ask you, and I'll tell you how to do it first, and then we'll go through it. You're going to breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 7, and then let it out for 8. Breathe in through your nose for 4, hold it for 7, let it out of your mouth for 8. You're going to do that 4 times. If it's uncomfortable, just breathe normally. So just do that on your own. Breathe in for 4, hold it for 7, and let it out for 8. Do that 3 more times. Next, I'm going to invite you to either stay with that, or if you can begin to pay attention to your breath. Without controlling it now, just letting it naturally happen. And if you can rest your attention on your breath, either your nose, your throat, might be in your lungs, or even your belly. And just let your attention go on your breath. When your attention goes off, which it will, you'll be distracted by thoughts or sounds or feelings. Just kindly and gently bring your attention back to your breath. And you may do that hundreds of times. Just try that for a few moments. And the last thing I'm going to ask you to do, instead of just paying attention to your breath, see if you can bring your awareness to the room and to yourself and to expand it to whatever sounds you hear, to whatever thoughts you have, to whatever sensations in your body, and just be present with them to the best that you can, and just follow them without controlling them, and seeing if you can just open up your awareness. And again, if you get totally lost, you can come back to your breath as an anchor. And in a few moments, you're going to hear a bell 3 times. On the 3rd time, you can open up your eyes. What I'd ask you to do next is just find a person next to you, introduce yourself if it isn't somebody you know, and just in 15 to 30 seconds, describe what that was like for you to do it. And there is no right or wrong answer. Just go ahead and do that. 15 to 30 seconds, describe what that was like. We can go to that screen. Okay, so just that we get this out of the way, what you just did was meditation. People freak out over it. They have all these weird views of it. And I'll break it down a little bit for you. And I'm going back into my skeptic days, because if you told me 30 years ago that I was going to be a meditator, I grew up building houses as a carpenter. And if you told me that I'd be a meditator and told me that I'd be teaching meditation, it was a whole different thing. So just to break it apart briefly, and I'll get much more in detail with this during the talk, the first part that you did, the 4-7-8, that's actually a relaxation technique. That's all it is. A lot of people confuse meditation with relaxation. So the 4-7-8 turns on a part of your nervous system, which we'll get into a little bit, called the parasympathetic nervous system. That long exhale turns the parasympathetic nervous system on. That's our braking system. So hopefully you start to feel some type of relaxation when you did that. Some calmness comes over the body gently goes down. If I had a video camera on some of your faces, you can actually see your faces start to loosen up a little bit. Your shoulders go down. Simple relaxation technique. If you leave here just using that, that's tremendous. The second part is called concentration meditation. By putting your attention on your breath, it's like weightlifting. It trains your brain and trains your mind to actually stay focused and concentrated. So every time, it's kind of like a win-win. Every time you bring your attention back when it goes off, because it does go off, every time you bring it back, you're actually building the strength of concentration. And we're going to talk a lot about attention, because we're never taught how to pay attention. So that's concentration meditation. That's it. It's paying attention to your breath moment by moment and being able to bring it back kindly and gently without beating yourself up. And then the win-win part of it is when your attention's off and you catch it, now you're developing this thing called mindfulness, because now you're catching your attention and able to bring it back. So it's a win-win. It's not a bad meditation if you're going off someplace, because you're bringing your attention back. The last piece to it, which gets a little bit different, is called mindfulness meditation. It's being open to whatever's happening in the moment. And I'll get a little bit more into that and why that is so good for us. So let's talk a little bit about attention. Can you show the video? If you've seen this video, please don't tell people about it. There is a spoiler on it. Alex, can you start the PowerPoint? And you go to the second slide. So how many of you, honestly, just among yourselves, how many of you actually didn't see the gorilla? Did not see the gorilla. Excellent, excellent. Thank you for your honesty. This idea that we can multitask is absolutely wrong. Our attention can go only in one place at a time, and the research is really showing that. Women are much better than men at multitasking, right? I'm sorry, not multitasking, alternate tasking. We can switch from task to task, but you cannot hold two concepts in your brain exactly at the same time. That's why people don't see the gorilla. So then, again, if we start talking about mindfulness and us being mindless, we spend, some of the current research shows, we spend 47% of our time on what they refer to as automatic pilot. Here's what automatic pilot is. Have you ever met somebody and they told you their name, and then 2 seconds later you have no idea what their name is? That's autopilot. Autopilot is also, did you ever go in the shower? I don't have this problem, but if you ever go in the shower and you go, did I wash my hair? Did I not wash my hair? Putting things, the other day I found myself putting, I put something really weird in the refrigerator. I forget what it was, but we do this. That's autopilot. 47% of our time is spent on that. We're not aware of things. So we're going to talk a lot about attention, because what mindfulness and meditation will do for us is it helps build our attention. And it's a lifelong thing. It's the best way to describe it's like running. I know Mike's a big runner. If in the 40s or 50s you saw Mike running down the street, you'd either think he's a thief running away from somebody or a crazy person, right? Nowadays we see people running all the time, and it's good exercise. I believe mindfulness is going in the same place. We don't totally understand it. It's getting a little bit more acceptable. But like running, it's a practice. It's not something that you can do one time and all of a sudden you're going to be enlightened and everything's going to be perfect. If you do not practice it, it's not going to work at all. The other way I describe it for my patients when they come to me, it's if I was a physician and I offered you a drug and you never took the drug, and let's say it was an antibiotic, and you said that my infection's never going away, and they ask you, did you take the pill? I'm like, no, I never took it, but it should go away. It's the same type of thing. It's a practice, and we'll talk a lot about the practice and how difficult a practice it can be. So we'll talk a lot about attention. So I love this picture of me falling. This is a group of kids catching me. I work for a company, a nonprofit called Project Adventure. I teach what's called adventure-based counseling, and I work with them with mindfulness too. And I brought this picture up just to talk a little bit about my background and where I'm at, but also let's talk about attention. Imagine these kids. I did actually make it. I fell. They caught me. Imagine them not paying attention to me and what would happen. And I love the quote, too, about attention being the rarest form of generosity. You know when somebody really hears you, it has a very different feel than the person on the phone, because the moment they look at their phone, their attention is someplace else. And attention is critical for us, particularly in connecting with our kids and connecting with other people. I'm offering this program on two sides. There's a lot we can talk about for your kids, but I also have to throw it to you, too. And this came from one of my supervisors when I was in grad school. Sally Gold was her name. Sally never cursed. She was a Jewish grandmother I never had. And Sally turned to me at one point. I was in grad school. I was working 30 hours a week in an internship. I was a New York City limo driver, so every single night I was driving to God knows what hours. I was a little bit stressed. I think we could say that. Sally took me aside one day and says, excuse my language, but Sally said this. She goes, if you're going to help other people get their crap and shit together, you better learn how to do it yourself. And at first I was really insulted, but she just picked up, you're really stressed, you got all this stuff going on, and that's when I started looking into how do you get calm? How do you really take care of yourselves? And for my first exposure 30 years ago to meditation was through a martial art called Tai Chi. Some of you have seen elderly people do this really slow thing, moving like that. It's actually a martial art, and after 3 or 4 years, I learned how to fight with it. But a huge piece of Tai Chi is meditation, and it's actually considered a moving meditation. 30 years ago, when I first started this, I really was a closet meditator. I let nobody know. I had my Catholic parents in West Caldwell. I could never tell them I was doing this stuff. And I just started seeing the differences in working with patients. At the time, I was working with schizophrenics and heroin addicts in the village in South Bronx. Very stressful work. And finding out that the calmer I got, the more in tune I got, the more attention I could give, the better my work was. So if I can pass that on to you just from the beginning there. And yes, I did actually get caught by them, and we made it. So let's go to the next one. So how many of you have ever felt any stress? What do we mean by stress, though? It's a really interesting thing. I have to just bear with me for a second. I just saw this morning, and I had to share it, and you guys can answer this in your head for you. Have you ever felt in the last year, ready, it's a quick test, overextended with no solution or end in sight? Yes? Trapped in a never-ending rat race of to-dos to accomplish? Out of time to do the things you want to do? Unable to spend time with your loved ones? Feeling guilty for doing things you enjoy rather than being productive? Failing to find meaning or fulfillment in your day-to-day? Kind of ring true for all of us, right? So this is some of the recent statistics. This is from a professor at Stanford who wrote this book. It's called The Happiness Track. The Regis Group found 58% of Americans claiming that their stress is rising. Anxiety is the leading cause for mental health treatment in the United States, costing the nation over $42 billion. The use of antidepressants among Americans of all ages has risen by 400% in the last decade. And according to a 214 Gallup study, a parallel crisis is going on in the workplace nationwide. 50% of employees are unengaged, present, but not inspired, while 20% are actively disengaged, that is, very unhappy at work, costing the U.S. economy over $450 billion. Just read this morning. I'm thinking, this is amazing what we're doing, and what we're doing to ourselves and what we're doing to kids, and what stress really is. So, with that, I'm going to give you a little bit of, I have to hold this here because I got to use my hands. I'm going to give you a little brain lesson, all right? Those of you in the medical field, I'm really sorry. Those of you who hate science, I'm really going to sound smart for a couple minutes. I want you to imagine that my fist is a brain, all right? Technically, we have the two hemispheres and all, but if you have the brain like this here, this bottom section right here is called your reptilian brain. It's in your lower neck going into your spine. The reptilian brain, if you think of reptiles, there's no personality. I have kids who try to convince me that their lizards and snakes have personalities. They don't. Your reptilian brain, all it's doing is controlling your basic functions in you. Your digestive system, it controls breathing, which is interesting because we can control breathing, but we never forget to breathe. All right? So it's all the basics there. We have no control over this. I'll talk about some people who might have control, but none of us will have control over it. So the reptilian brain's there, but also in the reptilian brain, there's a thing called fight or flight. How many of you have heard of fight or flight? Okay? Do you know there's 2 other F's in there? So we have 4 F's. There's fight, flight, freeze, and faint. They all are survival tactics. So if I threw a snake in front of Lisa here, your response? She'd go away. It's a flight response. It's immediate. You have no control over it whatsoever. If you stepped on it, that's the fight response. If you freeze, a lot of trauma. People who go through traumatic events, they will freeze and just sit there. Fainting is really interesting. For animals, in a sense, fainting in front of a grizzly bear, really good. It protects us. Fainting in front of a black bear, not so good. Fainting also is when somebody sees blood, to faint, it actually puts them on the ground so they don't bleed out. It's all survival, so we have no control over this. If I start to open up the brain, this midsection here is called the mammalian brain. If you have dogs, particularly dogs, cats also, think about how your dog responds when you come home. It's really happy, right? I wish my kids were like this. The mammalian brain is, now to start thinking about it, it's the social brain. It's connected. I have done some work with wounded warriors through Project Adventure. We're using not only the adventure base and bringing mindfulness, but we're also using horses. Horses in equine therapy is amazing because you can't approach a horse really angry. You can't go to a horse really anxious. They won't deal with you. And so we're using that to get these men to really, and women, to really start focusing on their emotions and start to control them. There's a piece in the brain here, in the mammalian brain, called the amygdala. That's our alarm system, which will trigger the fight or flight. Okay, does that make sense to people? This last section, if I put it over the top, you'll see it go over here. That's our primate brain. And our primate brain is the same brain that we have, that we share with elephants, with dolphins, whales, and higher level primates. It's the thinking brain. It's the brain that can do calculations. It's the brain that can think about thinking, the metacognition. It's the brain that some people are the part of us, a frontal cortex here, that's also executive function. It pretty much controls a lot of what we do. That's making sense. If you notice, a healthy brain, all of this is connected. And the term that they use is integration. When a brain is integrated, we have a lot of health and we do great. When the brain's not integrated, what we do is we flip our lids. So imagine for a moment the last time you got in a fight with somebody. Did you say anything of intelligence? Think about it, though. And we do this as a couples counselor. My biggest thing is, can you teach a couple to spend 20 minutes apart, because that's when their cortisol levels will go down, they'll get calmer, and the brain starts to come back online, and then we start going, oh, I wish I didn't say that. I wish, and we get more rational. Start thinking about our kids now. Somebody looks at them the wrong way, something happens, they go immediately into fight or flight, they disconnect from their functioning in a sense, and the logic totally goes out. Road rage is the perfect example of it. So the goal is, can we keep this online? And how hard that is to keep this online, because this other part of our brain, this particularly the fight or flight, it's really, really powerful. It's given us a lot for survival, but right now we're not being attacked by bears, we're not being attacked by tribes, but a thought can trigger it. Then we start talking about anxiety disorders. If you start thinking all the time like something's going to come after me, something's going to come after me, you disconnect. If any of you have had a panic attack or your kids have had a panic attack, there's no logic. You try to get a kid, turn to a kid and say, oh, just breathe right now. It's not going to happen. You've got to find some way to disconnect and bring that back online. Is that making sense? So, stress. Can you go to the next one?
In a busy world with unending work and responsibilities piling up, stress can get to the best of us. But how bad is it for you, really? Can stress actually kill you? From a biological perspective, stress makes perfect sense. If you're about to get chomped on by a bear, your stress hormones better kick your butt into gear. But it turns out that your mortgage, unemployment, and looming exam all trigger the same stress response in your body. And unlike most animals, which eventually experience a major decrease in these hormones, humans can't seem to find the off switch. Even though it's not life and death, our psychological woes consistently bathe our bodies in these hormones, making our heart pound, muscles tense, and stomach turn. In Japan, they have the term karoshi, which literally translates to death from overwork. In what is now deemed an overworking epidemic, these individuals who are seemingly healthy and in their prime suddenly die. After being officially recognized and documented in Japan, these sudden heart attacks and strokes were quickly linked to stress. But how does stress cause this? Cortisol is one of the main stress hormones, which helps divert energy to where you need it and away from non-essential functions of the body. But with chronic stress exposure, problems arise. The immune system shuts down, inflammation is inhibited, white blood cells are reduced, and susceptibility to disease increases. Some evidence also suggests that prolonged stress may be involved in the development of cancer. When looking at the arteries of macaque monkeys, those under significant stress have more clogged arteries. This prevents blood from getting to the heart quickly during stress and can ultimately lead to heart attacks. The brain also takes a toll. When looking at mice exposed to stress, we see dramatically smaller brain cells with fewer branch extensions than normal mice. This is particularly prevalent in the areas associated with memory and learning, which may stir up some memories for you of those wonderful all-night study sessions. The acute stress and sleep deprivation can make it increasingly difficult to remember the things we want to. Perhaps the most telling story is in our DNA. We contain something called telomeres at the end of our chromosomes, which decrease in size with our age. Our video on aging here explains this process. Eventually, the telomeres run out, at which point the cell stops duplicating and dies. So telomeres are directly related to aging and length of life. And it turns out, stress may actually accelerate the shortening of these telomeres. But not all hope is lost for the perpetually stressed. Another hormone, oxytocin, has been shown to reduce this stress response. It helps your blood vessels relax and even regenerates the heart from stress-related damage. So how do we get more oxytocin? It's sometimes dubbed the cuddle hormone because it's released during positive social interactions and while caring for others. People who spend more time with others create a buffer or resilience to stress. So when life gets the best of you, just remember, you don't have to go it alone. Spend some time with those you love. It may just save your life.
Got a burning question you want answered? Ask it in the comments or on Facebook and Twitter.
And if you want the inside scoop on upcoming episode ideas and behind the scenes, check out our personal Instagram and Twitter handles. And subscribe for more weekly science videos.
So, how many of you, when you closed your eyes to try to do the meditation piece, got really sleepy? Okay, good, thank you. The one thing I wanted to say about that video and the sleep thing, Google, and I'll talk about Google's program. They have a program called Search Inside Yourself, bringing mindfulness into the workplace. They've been doing a lot of studies on sleep. And they have found in one of their studies, between the 7th and 8th hour of sleep is when our long-term memory sets in. How many of your kids get 8 hours of sleep? So if you start to look at this for a moment, if they're not getting 8 hours of sleep, you're not getting 8 hours of sleep, and they're studying, they're having a much more difficult time retrieving that memory because their long-term memory is not setting in. And Google's doing some really amazing work. It's one of the reasons they have the sleeping pods there. And they have found that productivity by taking naps in the afternoon, 20-minute naps. I got to lay in one of the sleeping pods. They're very comfortable. 20-minute naps, you get re-energized, and your productivity goes up. But it's something that we really need to look at. And when you get into meditation, people also start talking, oh, it's relaxing, it gets me to sleep. The goal of meditation is to become awake and aware. So when you do meditation and you get really tired, it just means you're exhausted, and you need to figure better ways to do it. So all stress is not bad. And that's one of the things, too, that people need to look at. There's a thing called eustress. And eustress, you'll hear other words for it. Has anybody ever heard the word, being in the zone? Yes? Or you ever hear flow? I love this guy's name, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He's a professor at the University of Chicago, has done a lot of studies on flow. And being in a flow state, the best that he'll describe is like when a musician or an athlete is in that zone area where time just disappears and you are at your highest level. It cannot happen when you're in distress. And think of our kids and think of you. Most of us are in that side, and we're not at our highest levels. The most impressive thing when I got to go visit Google was to see what they do to get people to be at a level that they're comfortable and they're also really reaching these high levels, and it's not through fear and it's not through pressure. It's actually helping them develop more and more. Mindfulness has a huge piece to do with it, with them. So what I'd like to do is, can I have 6 volunteers? I'm going to put you through a little bit of stress, but not too much. So come on, I just need 6 people for a minute, and I'll explain it. Come on up. Excellent. So I'm going to ask the 6 of you you can stand right next to Paul here, and if you can get in a circle. It's going to be a little stress. You can introduce yourselves. We got 6? And hugs, too. Excellent. Okay, so here's what I'm going to ask. You guys can just watch this, and if you want to, we'll just observe them for a moment. All right? I'm going to ask you guys to get in a circle, nothing in your hands. And I'm going to give you a really simple task. I'm going to ask you to put your fingers out like this, and I'm going to give you a hula hoop, and your job is to lower the hula hoop to the ground, just on your fingers. All right? You can't fight it, you can't lock it. If you disconnect from the hula hoop, just start over at this height. Any questions? All right. Watch what happens. Here you go. Ready? Lower the hula hoop. Oh, absolutely. Talk as much as you want. Hold on. All right. Stay there for a second. So I want you guys to do this. Please do this with us. You can do it seated, okay? So I'm going to ask you guys just to stand in just a comfortable position. You guys, again, sit with dignity. Sit upright. All right? You guys can close your eyes. Do the same as I'm telling them. Everybody can hear me? Okay? So I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to begin focusing on your breath. But this time, just pay attention to your breath. Again, don't go too crazy with it yet. But this time I want you to control your breath. I want you to have it go in 5 seconds. 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And just begin to pay attention to that breath. The next thing, if you feel comfortable doing this, place one hand on your belly and one hand on your heart. Not the place that you do pledge allegiance, actually above your heart. Just begin to notice those sensations. Stay with the breath. And again, when your attention goes off, just kindly and gently bring it back. 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. Please try to be quiet. Okay? The next step I'm going to ask you, in your mind's eye, the best that you can, imagine a place that's really safe for you. It could be on the beach. It could be in your room. It could be on a bicycle. It could be someplace that you feel comfortable and safe and accept that you can be alone or you can be with other people. And just do the best that you can to be there, no matter what distractions come along. Again, with the 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. In a moment, I'm going to give you the hoop again. You can eventually talk, but approach the hoop this time from this place rather than where you were before. You guys come up here. You can talk eventually. Can we give him a hand? Thank you. Thank you. Oh, it's fine. So that wasn't magic at all. And they cheated a little bit. I'm going to give you that. They locked it a little bit. But here's what happens with us. When our attention is off and they were distracted and stressed, you saw it went up in the air. There's no helium in that or anything. Let me explain what you just did, and you might notice. The first part that you did, the 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, that's called a heart breath. And the heart breath will do the same thing as a 4-7-8 breathing. It turns on your parasympathetic nervous system. It gets you to start relaxing. And the moment you do that, yes, there's a mouse in the thing. We'll see how we do with that distraction, because I hate mice. So, heart breath. Hold on. All right, it's over there. It's gone. So we'll see how we do. So the first 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out is a heart breath. Okay? This is going to be fun. So next part. Next part, you might have noticed a little bit with the hands on you. This is coming out of research in Stanford, and particularly with trauma work. The hands on your belly and on your heart are touching what's called the vagus nerve. If I asked you where your brain is, where would you point? Where's your brain? Everybody points here. Current neuroscience is showing our brain is through our entire body, particularly this thing called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve goes from up here to our heart and to our guts. Vagus stands for wandering, so it's a nerve that wanders all around. This idea of gut feelings, it's absolutely real, and you need to trust that. By touching the vagus nerve, you release oxytocin. So if you started to get calm, you're actually releasing, as they talked in the video, this thing called oxytocin. Oxytocin will calm us down quite dramatically. The research is interesting. Depends. They're trying to figure out if the right hand up top, the left hand, they don't know yet. It just depends on who you are. That's why I didn't give you directions. And the last thing about the visualization, it's really interesting. This mostly comes from the sports world. Our brains don't know the difference between what's real and what's fake. And I'll show you in a couple minutes about how that works. But in the sports world, one of the greatest studies I saw was probably like 10, 15 years ago. College basketball players, same level players, they were all, I'm going to say they're pretty same level. 3-point shots. Half the group physically practiced it. Half the group visualized it. When they test them, they did almost exactly the same. They're finding other ones. This one I like, but I'm not convinced. They find if we think about exercise and do like thinking like I'm lifting, it's not working for me, but we'll see what happens. So we don't know that. And I'll give you a quick story about my son and show you how powerful this is. My sons are doomed. Both my wife and I are therapists, so God forbid what happens. Colin was about 8 years old. I came home one night, and Colin had watched a special on Katrina, the hurricane. And I came in, my wife said, Colin can't go to sleep. He's not a nervous kid, but said he can't go to sleep. And so I go up to him, and I ask him what's going on. He goes, well, Dad, I keep on thinking about hurricanes. The cognitive therapist in me brings my laptop, show him the weather report. It's February. It's going to be really clear, 15 degrees. There's no way a hurricane's coming. great eight-year-old goes, "No duh, Dad. But I keep on picturing the hurricane and the people who got hurt, and it scares me." I taught him how to do this, the breathing. It's actually called PERT. It comes from a program, again, this is from Stanford. It stands for Positive Emotional Refocusing Technique. So I'll give you a nice little acronym. He did this. He fell asleep within 10, 15 minutes. Next morning, I asked him, "Carl, where'd you go?" He goes, "Disney. I was with Grandma and Grandpa. We were in Disney." We don't know the difference. And so it's really interesting to see what happens with that. Can we go to the next one? Just hit it. Doug with the squirrel, right? We have a really hard time paying attention. Next one. And what is called monkey mind. And so let's start getting into thoughts for a second, and then we'll see how stress plays into thoughts. So for the next 10 seconds, do not have a thought. How'd you do? Average person, I've heard two numbers, so we'll go in between. Average person has 65 to 80,000 thoughts a day. It's actually pretty easy to test it out. If you want to do it, you can call me back and let me know. Sit for a minute and count your thoughts. And then double it, because every time you count, that's a thought. Right? 96% of our thoughts are exactly the same thoughts that we had yesterday. We're really kind of boring. Right? And then our thoughts, if we really start getting into our thoughts and what our thoughts do around anxiety, yes, a bear's attacking us. We have a great system to protect us. But right now, I start thinking somebody doesn't like me. I'm a high school kid. Somebody doesn't like me. Fight or flight goes on. I am now stressed out. And now I start doing a thing called ruminating, where I just think about it, think about it, think about it. That's what's causing us stress and anxiety. So to freak you out a little bit, too, about this, how do you know you have a thought? Anybody? How do you know you have it? We have them. We have 65,000 of them. How do you know you have a thought? We have a voice in our head. I think everybody will agree to that. And that voice chatters. Imagine if that voice in your head was your roommate and it was a live person. It doesn't shut up. And it doesn't say the nicest thing. My voice in my head is not sitting there going, "Hey, John, you look really good today and you're really smart." It's usually really negative, right? Imagine that voice in your head, not only that it's a roommate, and again, I love when I tell this to high school kids, imagine that voice in your head is connected to a loudspeaker. And everybody hears everything you're thinking. How embarrassing could that be? We judge all day. God, she's wearing that. She said that. What's going on? And we start doing this stuff. Here's the other thing. This gets a little freaky. We all agree we have a voice in the head, right? Multiple voices, that's a whole other thing. We have to talk about that. But we agree we have this voice in our head. Who's listening to it? We are. What's that mean, though? And I've heard people talk about the consciousness. I've heard people talk about a lot of different things around that. Deepak Chopra, if you know him, he'll call it the soul, but not from a religious perspective. It's our essence of who we are. We're listening. And here's a really interesting thing, and this is what mindfulness and meditation is trying to get at. That part of us that's listening to the thoughts, it doesn't get stressed out. It's calm. It's not until we connect with the thoughts that then we start revving up our system and we start getting into the fight and flight and everything else. So the goal of meditation, again, it's not that strange. Can we get to that point where we just observe what's going on? Does that make sense to people? Let's go ahead for a second. So my life is full of fear and anxiety. The only thing that keeps me going is this blanket. I need help. We can start talking about what blankets we all have and the things that we deal to cope with our feelings and thoughts and distractions, and our phones are wonderful distractions for us, and so many things that distract us. So here's the other question. How do you know when you have a feeling? Right? These are things we don't talk about. We know we have a feeling because we feel it. And one of my favorite lines, I didn't read the whole book, but James Joyce's Dubliners, there's a great line in there John Kabat-Zinn talks about. It says, Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. We are horrible. We do not connect with our bodies. Sorry, Mike, I'm going to say this. Education teaches from here up. We don't teach anything with the body, but the body is learning. And if we start talking about neuroscience, the body holds on to lots. I've learned a lot of this from dealing with trauma and dealing with the wounded warriors. bodies, there's lots of stuff going on, and our memories are in our bodies and all that, and science is now showing it. It's not just a nice thought. So we start dealing with these feelings. And I'll show you how fast this gets triggered. Let's say you all get to know me. I get to know all you. We're all really good friends. You like me. I'm a nice guy. We're walking down the street one day, and you see me, and you wave to me because you're so excited to see me. You're like, John, John. And I don't respond at all. I actually just keep on walking ahead and don't say a word. What's the first thing that comes up to you? Right? I did this with a group of therapists last week. One of them told me, you're an effing whatever. I got cursed out at, lots of different things. And then finally somebody said, maybe you didn't see me. But look where your head went to instantly and went into the emotions too. And that's us. That's adults who have, our brains are a little bit different than teenagers. What's happening with them? And now they're being taken over by this thought. Can't stand it. And I can give you further information. I had earbuds in. They're wireless. I was listening to tunes. I just had no idea you were there. And then start looking at it this way. Let's say that day, the love of your life dumped you, and then I didn't wave back. Now, all of a sudden, even John hates me. And you go instantly there. Or that day you win the lottery, or you find the love of your life, and you're sitting there going, I don't care. And we're filtering everything all day long through our mind. And look how impactful it is and how fast it happens. All right? So I'm going to do another thing with you, and just bear with me for a second. Sit upright, be ready for this. I'm going to say a word. I'm going to repeat it 4 times. I'm going to get a little bit loud. So I want you to close your eyes, and I just want you to feel your body. I was talking about feelings. We'll see how this goes. So again, I'm going to get a little bit loud. I'm going to repeat the word 4 times. Just feel the word. Here it goes. No! 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 Where'd you feel that? You can open your eyes. Stomach. There's no right or wrong answer. Stomach, chest. I've heard ears. Loosening or tightening? Tightening. Okay, let go of that. I'm going to give you another one, not as loud. Now you're a little bit ready. Here we go. Yes. 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 Where'd you feel that? Basketball. Chest. Loosening or tightening? Can you go to the next slide? Go one more. Move it ahead. This is from a new field of study called Interpersonal neurobiology. Great word. We have an impact on each other. When I do a lot of teacher training and therapist training and parent training, I get into which one are you? Are you the no parent that when your kids are around you, they're fearful and their bodies are responding? Because the moment that happens, or if you're the no teacher, the moment that happens, you go into fight or flight. And what happens then is part of your brain, the hippocampus that deals with memory, gets shut off. Because if we're in fight or flight, you do not need your memory. This is old stuff in us. So think about the times that you've taken a test or your kid's taken a test, totally blank out during the test. But right afterwards, you remember everything. That is exactly what's happening. I have lots of arguments. I used to coach. I have lots of arguments with coaches about yelling. Because what happens with yelling, you will turn on the fight or flight, and you think you're getting the best out of your players, but you're actually not. Phil Jackson, if you know Phil Jackson, has brought a lot of mindfulness in and talks a lot about this. And I'll show you some of his stuff because it's really powerful. When we're looking high performance, you do not want to be in a fear state for high performance. It doesn't work. All right? So can you go back to the last slide? So just talking very briefly, I did a lot about the brain over on the right-hand side. I'll just briefly talk about what the mind. What is the mind? Anybody know? Because we're talking about mindfulness, we should talk a little bit about the mind. Anybody have a good definition of the mind? It's not the same as the brain. And just to let you know, they have no idea where it's at. People will point here, but they don't know. And their neuroscience is exploring this. The best definition I heard comes from this guy named Dan Siegel. He's a brain researcher and a psychiatrist from UCLA, one of my teachers. He talks about this idea, I'll give it to you and then we'll take it apart. The mind is an embodied process that regulates the flow of information and energy. Sounds really fancy, right? Really simple. The yes and no that I just did, we'll take the no, all right? Your body, it's embodied. You felt it, right? I gave you information. It was no, or you heard the word, and I gave you energy with my tone. That's the mind, and that's what we process all the time. The last thing, and where the interpersonal neurobiology gets into and how it connects to relationships, I'll show you a quick example of how this deals with relationships. If I take my hand and do this, if you feel your bodies for a moment, anything? Highly doubt it. All right? But if I add this to that motion, any of you get thirsty? Why? You saw me drinking this. What's happening in your brain is a thing called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons reflect exactly what's going on the outside. It is the brain basis of, and a lot of research around this, of empathy. When we can feel what we feel with other people, when we're around them, we're connecting on a brain level. And it's really interesting on how they found this. So again, we can get really into that. But all of this is connected because the more mindful we get, the more we get connected with other people. And this is where this interpersonal neurobiology. Can you go ahead? So, mindful or mindful? Which one are we? Our dogs are excellent at this. Great book out there called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it's the idea that a zebra or mammal who doesn't have this higher level thinking can just let things go all the time. We kind of stay with things. Can you go ahead? So Jon Kabat-Zinn, one sec. Jon Kabat-Zinn is, and I just put his name up there. How many of you have heard of him? Excellent. Jon Kabat-Zinn was a microbiologist at MIT teaching anatomy. He was a meditator, and he started to realize this meditation stuff is actually doing something. And he started studying the brain and asking the questions, why is that you, Mass? What is this doing for us? And he started working with people who had chronic illness and chronic pain and asked them to say, let's see what we can do because this medication isn't working. So he said, let's use meditation. They thought he was crazy at first for doing this. It's now 40 years. MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, is world-renowned and getting some of the best results and some of the best studies. So here's John's definition of mindfulness. Paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally, as if your life depended on it. Take that part, paying attention, we get that, moment by moment. So when you're doing the breath, concentration, moment by moment, paying attention to the breath. Non-judgmentally is interesting. We always judge, but it's catching the judgment. It's like the hand raising when I wave the hand at you. It's catching it and going, what's really going on? You still have the judgment. John's a jerk. He doesn't pay attention to me, all that. But you can catch yourself and then start responding to it rather than reacting. The last part is really interesting. Non-judgmentally, as if your life depended on it. I was actually at a conference with him, and a bunch of us were eating lunch, and I asked him about this. I said, I don't get my life doesn't depend if I'm meditating or not. John's a New Yorker. Turned around and said, walk through New York mindless. Watch how quickly you get hit. What he then got into more so about this automatic pilot, if we spend 47% of our lives on autopilot, we're really not living. We're missing out on a lot. There's a guy named Mark Williams who created mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. He gets into this idea. He actually has a whole calculation to how many years of our lives we're missing because we're not present. And it's staggering to see how much time we're not present. So I get that piece of it about, as if your life depended on it. Go ahead. This is Dan Siegel's definition. I don't need to read it for you. Go ahead. So between stimulus and response is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. Anybody know who Viktor Frankl is? Viktor Frankl made it through the Auschwitz. His whole family died. He wrote probably one of the most powerful books I ever read, Man's Search for Meaning. And he wrote about this after World War II. He didn't call it mindfulness and meditation, but the people who survived the concentration camps were the people who could be moment by moment. If you ever get a chance, I had a very dear friend of mine who had Viktor Frankl as a professor, the most optimistic man he ever met. And that amazes me. The man dealt with so much tragedy. And my friend Stan, who had him as a professor at Stanford, said you wouldn't believe the optimism. And to show it to you, at some point, go on YouTube, look up Viktor Frankl's last lecture. He's 94 years old. He's got a wicked sense of humor. And he's talking at 94 years old, he's talking about, he's taking flying lessons. And he was learning how to fly an airplane. It's this space that we're looking to create. It's this idea, can you go to the next? It's this idea of us learning how to respond rather than to react to things. Give you another quick story with my sons. My son Sean is notorious for hiding on me. Think about Inspector Clouseau in the old Pink Panther movies and K2. Sean's best, I have to give you the best one. The best one ever Sean did, he was probably 11 or 12. He hid under my bed once. And I went to take a shower, I was getting ready to go out. 20 some odd minutes. He's got the patience of, unbelievable. Hid under my bed, I went to get my clothes off the bed, he grabbed my ankles. Right? I lost all muscle control from here down. That I didn't pee my pants amazed me. But here's the thing that happened. So Sean's been doing that for me forever. I was away at a training. It was at a 5-day meditation training, very intense. We're meditating probably 6 to 7 hours a day. So when you practice, you start to notice things. It was the second day that I was home. No, the first day I was home. And I had come in. I had no idea Sean was there, which normal is like him. I'm drinking a glass of water, talking to my wife in front of me. Sean comes from behind, scares me. The glass of water goes into my face, cuts my lip open. Water and blood start pouring down on my favorite Ralph Lauren shirt. What do you think I felt? Angry. My hand went instantly like this. I've never hit my son. I got the closest I ever did. That's instant. There's the fight or flight. It was instant, and I felt my body tense. Here's the difference, and I cannot do this all the time, but the difference was because I was practicing a lot, I caught myself. And I was able to gather, and I'm like, I'm angry. I can feel it in my body. I can tell you exactly what happens in my body when I'm angry. I opened my hands up. I got calmer. And then I slowly went over to Sean when I kind of brought my lid back on, and I took the glass of water and poured it over his head. Had a nice laugh. I could have ruined that moment. I could have yelled at him, which could have been even worse. I could have hit him. And here was a 13-year-old boy at the time looking to engage with his father to play, and I could have made it a disaster. Think about how many times that happens to us. We're stressed out, we're dealing with work, and our kids are just looking to connect with us, and we do something like that where we explode because we're not mindful. That's how powerful. I think it's one of the most powerful things that when that happened to me, and that was 5 years ago, I'm like, this is something I need to even do more. Because if I can catch myself there, where else can I start to catch myself? And that's when I got even deeper into the practice and doing more about it. Can I do that all the time? Absolutely not. Catch me on Thursday nights when the boys don't take out the garbage? Whole other thing. But it's starting to realize that we can do that. So it's this idea. And the other piece of it, it's about developing emotional intelligence. It's not just about developing relaxation. It's going further and us getting more emotionally intelligent. I just want to go through this quickly. We could have a whole other lecture about emotional intelligence. Just do the 5 domains. If you look at the top domain, self-awareness, that can only happen by some of these practices. And then all this other stuff starts to happen. We start to self-regulate. We start to learn how to respond rather than me hitting him. All right? Motivation is a whole other issue, that we start being motivated for intrinsic reasons. Empathy is huge. There's lots and lots of work that's being done about mindfulness, develops empathy and compassion in people, and then social skills about dealing with other people. Right? So go ahead. Quick test on emotional intelligence for you. Can you just hit it one more time, Alex? How many say males? So you all say females. Go ahead, hit it. It's males. Next question, go ahead. What occupation is this? These are highly emotionally intelligent males who are really present, got all this great stuff going on. Go ahead. This is coming from the book that I'll show you at the end, some of the books on how to get started. This comes from Search Inside Yourself, and some of the research they did, they use this as an example. The best executives, the best leaders are not the ones who are diehard, let's tough it out. It's the ones who know how to connect to people. And think about that from a common sense point of view. You'd rather work for somebody who has faith in you than you're doing it out of fear. So at naval commanders, and the report gets into it, at that level, they're not drill sergeants. They need to connect with a lot of people. All right, go ahead. So hit it one more time, please. So this is Search Inside Yourself. I love the title. It's the unexpected path to achieving success, happiness, and world peace. This is the program that's going on at Google. Google has the money. They've hired all these top people to create this program. I've been very fortunate to go through their training. It's amazing. And one of my questions to them was, why is this not in the schools? It actually is part of their mission statement to bring it in. Go ahead again, and one more. Two other areas, just to let you know. Born to be Good gets into, and again, mindfulness is a huge piece of all this. Born to be Good is coming out of UC Berkeley. It's this idea that we are made to collaborate with each other. We are made, the idea, and Keltner talks a lot about Darwin's work and gets into the idea, survival of the fittest. Everybody's heard Darwin, right? That was actually Spencer. This guy Spencer said that. Darwin wrote more about collaboration and more about compassion, that's what's going to help the species survive. And the last one to the right, there's James Doty. James Doty is a neurosurgeon, and he is the head of the Cultivating Compassion program that is at Stanford Medical. Mindfulness is a huge piece because they're also starting to realize that with mindfulness, we're creating compassion. And he's doing a lot of work with physicians and all about how to develop compassion. Go ahead. And the last is the Mind Life Institute. It's combining contemplative practices with current neuroscience. There's a guy named Richie Davidson out at the University of Wisconsin who's a huge part of this, and looking at the idea that meditators' brains are different. And I'll give you a really quick example. There's a guy named Mathieu Ricard. Mathieu, I don't have a speech problem. He's French. Mathieu was a microbiologist at the Pasteur Clinic in France, one of the most prestigious places, had a PhD, and for some reason, at one point in his life, he left and became a Buddhist monk. Go figure. Time magazine did an article on him. If you Google him, he's considered the happiest man alive. So here's what's happening in the brain. When you're meditating, this comes from some early research from MBSR, paying attention just 20 minutes a day to your breath, like you did in the beginning. Paying attention, bringing your attention back. Your right frontal lobe is where pessimism and avoidance sits. And when somebody's depressed or avoiding, if they put them on a functional MRI, you'll see most activity in that part of the brain, right? Left frontal lobe is where optimism sits. It's this idea of approaching problems rather than avoiding. And there's a question on happiness. In an 8-week program, the original one was done with software engineers, doing 20 minutes a day, focusing on your breath, the brain shifts to the left side. And that's been duplicated numerous times. There's a thing called neuroplasticity. Our brain can change at any point in our lives. And just by doing it, they actually show that the left frontal lobe gets thicker, and that's good, and it gets this gray matter. Mathieu Ricard, who was part of this whole thing because he had the science background, he said, well, let's start studying these Buddhist monks and start studying rabbis and start people who are doing contemplative practices. Let's see what's going on. They say Mathieu Ricard's brain, his left side, is off the charts. And going to an extreme in mindfulness, one of the things that they measure is a thing called a startle response. So if I fired a gun, we'd all do this every single time I did it. They say Mathieu Ricard, when he can get into a meditative state and just being really present, they say they have to use a high-speed camera to see his face move. Now you're talking, the 10,000 hour rule? That's Mathieu Ricard. He has well over 10,000 hours of meditation. But he's been really a huge piece of getting science to start looking at this, going, we need to look at these practices. And it's not just Buddhist. I get that all the time. People go, well, it's all Buddhism. Absolutely not. They're finding it with prayer. They're finding it in every religion that there's some type of meditation. All right? Go ahead. Just to let you know, because then people turn to me and say, yeah, well, how's this going to help my kids get into school? This was on January 20th. Somebody sent me this headline. To get into college, Harvard report advocates for kindness instead of overachieving. Really, really good article. They're talking about they want authentic kids. They don't want kids who are just doing things to do things. And I started looking through the study. There are hundreds of schools that are involved in this right now. Go ahead. Okay, can you go back to that? Here's a quick video, and then we'll end up with questions. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm Dan Harris. You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. It's all over the place. The word itself is kind of boring and anodyne sounding, but it's actually a really rich word with lots of meanings. So I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. I'm going to say that again because this is a game-changing proposition. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your mind right now without necessarily taking the bait and acting on it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With mindfulness on board, with just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice, oh, my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you, rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. A superpower. How do you get it? I hesitate to tell you this, but the way to get it is through meditation, which I know some of you will think sounds irretrievably annoying. However, it's not. It's doable, even for you. And we have some other videos up on the site where you can learn how to do it, and you should watch those videos immediately. However, before you do that, let me just tell you one thing. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, who's chasing you? But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribed for you. Again, these are all things that we do, and if we don't do, we feel guilty about it. Let me just close by saying, mindfulness is not going to solve all of your problems. It's not going to render your life a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. There's a reason why, when I wrote a book about meditation, I called it 10% Happier. Nonetheless, this is a superpower, and one that is accessible by you immediately.
So just to get started, and I want you to look at this like exercise. You can go tonight, if you grab my flyer, there's a meditation in the back there. You could go tonight and start a meditation practice for free. You can buy some of these books up here, and I'll describe them in a second. And they're all on the flyer so that you have it. And there's a couple websites I put on the flyer, a couple apps. You could also spend a fortune and go away to retreats. And again, like exercise, you can get personal trainers. You can do it in lots of different ways. You need to figure out what works best for you. I will tell you, retreats really put it into you in a different way that you get to practice it, and particularly silent retreats. And this is the hardest thing I can tell you I've ever did in my life. I was on one retreat where we had to be silent for 3 days. And here's what silence is, though, and that's nothing. That's nothing. Some of my teachers and some of my friends talk about 10-day silent retreats or a month-long silent retreat. I don't know who's got time. 3 days of silence is you can't write, you can't listen to music, and you can't read. You want to get into your head and who you are. It's pretty amazing. And part of this I got turned on to because I train a lot of outward bound instructors. They use this solo time where this starts to happen, and a lot of growth happens. So just briefly about the books, the Jon Kabat-Zinn books, there's great beginners books on meditation, particularly the Mindfulness for Beginners that actually has a CD in it, so it gives you some meditations and you can listen to it. I added the 6-minute solution. You don't have to admit to this, but if we have any lawyers in the group, Scott was somebody that I trained with, and I don't know him that well, but we trained years ago together, and I was fascinated. He was a divorce attorney in Miami, And he was teaching meditation to lawyers because he really got more into the whole idea of mediating and how mindfulness was really helping these attorneys help these families. Scott's doing amazing work down there. You see Dan's book, 10% Happier. You'll see in my book, it's a really skeptical book. Deal with the first part, because he will come across as a jerk in the beginning of the book. He does, and he becomes a really kind person. But I've had a couple people I recommend it to patients all the time, and they're like, I can't stand this guy, he's a jerk. But he gets out. Mindful Athlete and 11 Rings. George Munford is the person that works with Phil Jackson in training these athletes about meditation. You've got to, particularly with 11 Rings, you've got to hear him talk about teaching meditation to Dennis Rodman. It's pretty interesting. 2 last books. If you have no interest in meditation and all, you can still work on mindfulness. It is just an attention and trying to build it more and more. Meditation has proven to be the best way of developing and quickest, but you can just become more alert. Ellen Langer is, I believe she's up at MIT or Harvard. She wrote this whole book. It doesn't even talk about meditation. And the last one is The Art of Stillness. Pike Iyer talks about how important it is to be still. So there's lots of different ways to get this going. Questions, as I've babbled off a lot of stuff tonight.
Which one would you recommend
For the kids, would I recommend high school kids? My son turned me on to this. Is an app, Headspace. Headspace, it's on the sheet. I put it on their apps. Headspace is a free app for 10 days. The guy, his name is Andy Puddington, I believe. He's got this wonderful Australian accent. And my son turned me on to that. I have one son who has nothing to do with meditation. Sean, the hider, will not deal with meditation. My son, Colin, is trying to bring meditation to his own school. He's gotten totally into it. Around that, teaching kids, and I learned this from John Kabat-Zinn, the best is what they see in you. So to force this on your kids, and I have to admit, it drives me crazy when I have parents who send their kids to my private practice and say, teach them how to meditate, and the kid has no interest. It's not going to happen. And it actually does the reverse. What I tell the parents, then, why don't you come in with me? Let me start teaching you, and let the kids start seeing you calm down, and then watch what happens, because then they'll get really curious. I've done it with families. There's one therapist I work with. It works really neatly, where I'll actually do a family session where I'll do an hour or so meditation with the family, and then she'll do the family therapy. That's been okay if everybody agrees. But it is something that I would tell you, it's kind of like, again, look at it exercise. If you're telling your kid, you need to get out there and exercise, and you're sitting on the couch eating potato chips, the hypocrisy won't work. So, yeah, I would tell the apps are the best. There's a book called Mindful Teens. My son's given different reviews on it. The kids don't like to read. I'm sorry. So I would tell you that. It's also on the sheet. Mindful.org is a wonderful, wonderful website that's got lots of resources. They have a whole section for adolescents on there, too. Any other questions? So, yeah. Yeah, and again, I'm sorry, this is just an introduction. So moving meditation, that's how I started with Tai Chi. Yoga is a moving meditation also. I think if that works for you, there's walking meditation. There's a very famous Vietnamese monk named Thich Nhat Hanh, who, if you get his books, talks about walking meditation. There's a style of running called Chi running. It's a meditative style of running that was created by a guy named Danny Dyer, who does ultra marathons. He does 50 and 100-mile races. You got to put your brain someplace there. So movement's great. Some of the research that I've seen, and again, it's minute, they say the best and most brain activity is happening in seated meditation, but it's better to do the other stuff with it. I think yoga, particularly, like some of the trauma work that I've done, yoga is amazing because it gets into the body for people. So I think that's important. So, yes? Yes. It's actually to get the body more prepared to sit longer. And again, once you tire the body out, your mind starts to slow down a little bit. So yeah, it's a great mix. And we don't understand yoga that much in our society compared to what it really is. Anything else? Yeah. About fainting, I mean, the fight or flight response is automatic. We don't have a lot of control over that. The only thing I mentioned before, the reptilian brain there, this is from the work of the Mind Life Institute. They actually found Buddhist monks who can raise their temperature. They can sit in the snow and actually raise their body temperature that snow melts. Time magazine did a thing on that. None of us are going to be able to do that. So I think, with fainting and stuff like that, I think trying to look at what is causing it beforehand, you might be able to be preventative. But once it happens, I've never known anybody. Yeah, because it's very deeply wired into us. Yeah.
These teenagers have about 2.5 months off in the summertime. What is like one thing somebody could do for like a couple hours or a beach or something that just read one thing on this, one thing they could learn from 2.5 months?
From 2.5 months. Well,
They have plenty of time.
Well, I was just going to tell you, one of the programs that Dan Siegel's gotten involved in, and I've met with the leaders of it, it's a program called IB.me, Inward Bound Mindfulness Education. It is for teenagers. It runs retreats, teaching mindfulness and yoga to teenagers, and they've just added on a whole wilderness expedition piece to it. So I know there's one program happening out in Yosemite with that. They're all around the country. They're a company based out of Boston, a nonprofit out of Boston. And what I love about them is they only charge you by percentage. So they go by your salary and what you really can afford or not. So kids who can't really afford it get to go, and they get a lot of kids, and they have a great reputation. So I recommend to a lot of my clients, teenagers during the summer, if they really get into this, go do IB.me. And it's a weekend or a week away, really getting into it. And IB.me, Inward Bound Mindfulness Education. The thing that I like about that the most, too, is kids think this is weird. When you all of a sudden you get a bunch of teenagers do it, it now normalizes it. So I think that's really important. So, and again, I think the apps, if a kid's not a reader and they're not going to listen to CDs and listen to guided meditations, the apps, both Headspace and I think the other one is Calm, is another one that's out. There's a whole bunch of them out there. The kids do better with that. It's more their technology. Yep.
Well, thank you. Why don't we give a big round of applause to John? Thanks, John. I think you can probably see why we've wanted him in district here for the past year, working with our teachers and our staff, because he's terrific. So thank you all again for coming. I'm sure you can shoot John an email with his contact information if you have any questions. And I have one other gentleman who wants to make an announcement as well.
Sorry, hi everybody. I'm Dave Changer. I'm the Student Assistance Counselor from New Providence. That's going to be New Providence is going to be the location of the final parent series, parent wellness series. It'll be May 12th, 7 o'clock at night in the auditorium there. We have Dr. Mike Friedman coming in. He's going to do purpose-based parenting. It's a holistic look at engaging your kids and helping them engage their day and all the things that they do to find purpose and meaning and help them stay motivated through all the stuff they're doing. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about Mike Friedman before that evening, you can look at michaelfriedmanphd.com. That's his website, all one word. Or you can go to the Psychology Today and look at the Brick by Brick blog that he writes. He writes a bunch of interesting articles about the music industry and psychology and the overlap between them. But anyway, hopefully I'll see you all there on May 12th. Thank you very much.